This video looks at the topic of stance in moral theology. First off, a quick blurb about the phrase moral theology. St. Augustine describes theology as faith-seeking understanding. Moral theology focuses on how Christian faith informs our understanding of the best way to live our lives. What is our stance? Our stance is our starting point in the moral life. The term makes an analogy to physical posture. A common dictionary definition of stance talks about how an athlete stands during a sport. Some coaches describe a stance as getting into a ready position. Athletes adopt a stance that allows them to focus their attention the right way while preparing their bodies to respond quickly and well to the play of the game. Some quick examples. In track, during a start, runners focus their attention on the sound of the starter's pistol. They remain alert to react to their starter. Their actions at the starting line will always be the same for each race. They do not need to adapt in response to the play of the game. So their physical posture allows them to transition quickly from being stopped to building strong forward momentum. The stance in tennis requires much more responsive interaction between the actions of the competitor and the movement of the ball. So athletes need to keep alert to the play of the game. Tennis players may need to move forward, back, or laterally as they pivot to swing the racket. So they adopt a stance that maximizes alertness and responsiveness. Cricket batters also need to keep their eyes forward, but unlike tennis, they know where the ball will come from. They can focus more on the swing, so their physical stance changes and they move their feet apart for stability to maximize power in the swing. When we talk about stance in sport, we notice that stance directs our attention and allows our body to prepare for physical movement. In Christian ethics, the stance is called the logical first step in the moral life. This is an analogy. Christian ethicists are taking a concept from athletics to help us understand moral behavior. Like sport, the moral life involves paying attention to what happens and responding appropriately. Father Charles Curran, a professor of Christian ethics at Southern Methodist University, says this about stance in the moral life. It gives us a perspective on reality and is a critical source for further steps. What difference does our stance make? Most importantly, our stance influences our perspective, how we pay attention to our world. And, secondarily, it sets us up for the next steps we take in the moral life by providing critical direction to our moral reasoning and our choices. First, we will look at how a moral stance influences our perspective. C.S. Lewis said, "What you see and what you hear depends a great deal on where you are standing." A personal perspective is not entirely the same thing as moral perspective. Our personal perspective names our habitual ways of paying attention to the world. Personal perspective tends to be shaped by life experience, by our presuppositions, the things we believe to be true about the world, by our premises, the values we treat as foundational in our lives, by our priorities, and also by personal prejudices or emotional triggers. When we talk about moral perspective, we're talking about a morally critical point of view. We aspire to live by moral values. Some people call morality our better nature, but we do not perceive the world through moral values alone. Someone's moral values are part of their personal perspective, though personal perspective includes more than moral values. To understand the world, we use a number of different lenses: science, art, health, religion, business, and many other disciplines. These often overlap with morality, but not always. Our moral stance is the posture we take when we strive to live out our values. It's the first step we take when moral values guide us. Moral perspective, then, focuses on using moral values to understand ourselves and our world. A moral stance helps us pay attention to the moral features of life by helping us perceive the things most relevant to our values. Our stance directs our attention toward the things we value. For example, if we value freedom, when we look at a situation, we will look for freedom and for that which opposes it. Or if we value safety, when we look at a situation, we will be alert to sources of danger. A moral perspective also recognizes the things that honor and advance our values and those that undermine or threaten them. We have looked at how a moral stance influences our perspective. Let's turn our attention now to how a moral stance sets us up for the next steps we take. A moral stance provides us with critical direction. This means it prepares us to make choices that fit with our moral values by giving direction to our attitudes and actions. Our stance influences our attitudes about ourselves and our world by shaping, for example, who or what we trust, and also who or what we're suspicious of. Stance also influences what we habitually expect of life, of ourselves, of other people, or of our society. As we live, our stance also prepares us for actions that fit with our moral values. It directs us towards certain actions and away from others. It draws out emotions that incline us toward actions that fit with our values. So a moral stance sets a direction for us and influences our manner of acting. To better understand how a moral stance influences our perceptions and next steps, we can look at an example. If our moral stance has a strong focus on respect, we allow respect to shape our perspective and to give critical direction to our next steps. When respect shapes our perspective, it leads us to pay attention to the people and things we respect. Our understanding of respect also leads us to look for the kinds of actions we deem respectful and for those we consider disrespectful. When respect has a prominent place in our moral stance, it also offers critical direction for our next steps by influencing our attitudes about ourselves and our world. When we respect people, more often than not, we relate with them with attitudes of honor, attentiveness, and consideration. When we act respectfully, we also allow respect to guide our manner of acting. To look at an example of how respect guides our next steps, we can narrow our focus and look at respect for others' religion. Acting respectfully means honoring others' religious freedom. Though we may not share others' religion, out of respect for them, we honor their freedom in religious matters. Sometimes acting respectfully requires more of us. For example, when I know that a person considers a place sacred or holy, respect means honoring their values. I might ask what rituals to observe or rules to follow when entering their holy place. And sometimes acting respectfully requires still more of us. For example, out of respect for others and their religion, I may act to make it easier for people to observe their religious holidays. So if I'm an employer, I can give workers days off to observe religious holidays with their families according to their custom, even if that religion is not practiced by a majority in our society. Or schools can give students excused absences from classes on their religious holidays. In summary, our moral stance is the first logical step in the moral life. Our stance influences our moral perspective and provides critical direction to our next steps. Stance also guides our perspective by influencing where we look in the world and guides us by giving us a sense of what's right and wrong, good and bad, just and unjust. Finally, our stance offers critical direction for our next steps by influencing our attitudes about ourselves and our world, and by setting us toward a direction of acting and in a manner of acting.